Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Going Nuclear. I'm here with a really special guest. His name is Taylor McDonald. He is a recruiter in the nuclear energy industry. In this video, we're going to be getting an inside scoop as to how recruitment in the Canadian nuclear industry works. Right now, the nuclear industry is having unprecedented growth. And I know on the recruitment side, that's such an important part of facilitating that demand. And so I think when it comes to recruitment, it's always kind of in the shadows, right? Like what goes on. And so tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Who's the man behind the shadows, behind all those resumes? Tell us.
All right, yeah. So Taylor McDonald, I'm an external recruiter in the nuclear industry. I've been in the nuclear industry for about 2 years. My primary focus in the recruitment world is on early talent, really bringing in that pipeline of talent right into the industry and the organization right from day one, and really kind of building that pipeline out from student to new graduate into full-time opportunities afterwards.
When it comes to recruitment, I think it's kind of underrated. Whether it be a company, like a utility, or it be a vendor, partner, you want to make sure that you're focusing your energies on that top talent, right? It wasn't until I got into the industry that I realized that recruitment, like the people that you recruit, the culture that you create in an organization, is so important. Not only like the technical skills, right, but also behavioral, right? Making sure that you're creating that environment with those high achievers, and balancing things out. Tell us the art of recruitment. How does that work?
The art of recruitment? Well, it really kind of depends on what you're recruiting for. So for me in my role, I've recruited for everything from 1 or 2 particular positions, from 100 plus positions for a particular role. And you really kind of have to tap into 2 different sets of skills there. So for that 1 to 2 position, it really allows you to really wear that recruitment hat and be a recruiter. And you kind of really get to dive into the qualifications, the day-to-day life of the role, and really kind of find people that match these experiences. So something that I really like to do is just really sit down with the hiring manager and really understand the role. Because obviously, I have a background in human resources. I'm not an engineer, and I'm never going to be able to really bridge that gap. So that's where I got to spend a lot of time with my hiring managers to really understand what the role is on a day-to-day and how I can position that to my candidates to pitch the role and to really fill that position. So again, with those 1 to 2 position roles, what you're really doing is you're really boots on the ground a lot of the time. You're on LinkedIn a lot, kind of headhunting people. You're tapping into your network. You're resharing your jobs. You're resharing your positions, and really just spreading the word there. But what I really think a lot of the work for recruitment kind of goes on outside of those actual jobs. So, having a presence on LinkedIn, such as what we have here, and just being able to really position your company or your industry as a leader in its sector, I think is a really strong way to kind of have that constant recruitment presence. So if you do message a candidate where you think it's a strong fit for your job, they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile, and if they scroll on my LinkedIn profile, they're going to see just how fantastic the nuclear energy industry is in Canada, and really how much we have going on, whether it's refurbishment or small modular reactors or anything of that kind of nature. You'll see it on our LinkedIn feeds, and you'll be able to kind of see that excitement through our pages there.
LinkedIn's where it's at. Tell us about your inbox. Is that just blowing up?
Yeah, so this is something I really feel bad about most of the time, to be honest with you, because when I used to go to campuses and recruitment events and things like that, hunting early talent engineers, I would always say oh, shoot me a message on LinkedIn on Monday morning, and I'll definitely get back to you. But after you tell 500 people to message you on Monday morning, you might as well tell no people to message you on Monday morning, right? So LinkedIn inboxes, it's I can show you afterwards, but you just keep scrolling and scrolling, and there's messages in there. But what I really tell people is just do that double text, triple text me, just be shameless about it, keep following up, comment on our feeds, because once you comment on our stuff, it's there, it's public, other people are seeing it, so I can't ignore you at that point, right? But yeah, no, the LinkedIn inbox is there has to be a better way to do it, because right now it's just not working for me in particular right now.
I love this honest discussion, right? Because I tell a lot of folks, a lot of interns or a lot of people message me as well about jobs in the industry, and I forget to message back as well, right? And we're so busy, right? And following up, that's the best way to go, right? Yeah, and that's what I encourage students and even early career professionals is hey, don't just send one email. Like, you got to follow up 2 or 3 times. Like,
And I double text. Like, you just got to be shameless with it, right? You just got to keep positioning yourself and keep pitching yourself, and really just put yourself in front of the recruiter like as much as possible, because really that's just kind of like the best way to just increase your odds at getting that visibility to yourself there.
100%, 100%. And like, when it comes to LinkedIn, I want to dive a bit deeper into this,
Yeah,
right? When it comes to LinkedIn or other social media platforms, how are candidates leveraging those platforms? Like, what do you look for in a LinkedIn profile that really you're like, whoa, this person's exceptional. Like, I'm gonna look into giving them the interview opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's like a really great question, and it's a common question that I get when I visit campuses and different employers and events like NAYGN is how do I stand out? How do I leverage myself in the market and really position myself in a way to succeed? And my response really is, and this is especially geared towards the engineers out there, because again, that's my primary kind of thing that I target is the engineers, is that when I go to your LinkedIn profile, like I need to see that you get it. You know what I mean? Because like so many engineers, it's so easy to just be so focused on the engineering side of the house and just not build up that side of the house at all. When at the end of the day, like we're a business, like we work for firms, we work for businesses, so you have to display the fact that like you're an engineer, but you also get that business piece. So if I go on your profile and I can see that, oh, this person has a robust LinkedIn profile, they're engaging in the right content, they get the business side of the house as well as the technical side of the house, I think that just really increases your value overall so much. Because really you think about it, there's so many technical based roles at any of the nuclear companies here in Canada, but a lot of these roles are project based. And our project based roles, so many of these roles are in projects, right? So for projects, we need the engineers and we need the business people. So if you're an engineer that can bring us both sides of the house, like you just increase your value so much and you leverage yourself so much. So there's so many things that like I tell people to do and little qualifications that you can get. Because literally if you go on YouTube or if you go on LinkedIn and you do like an hour and a half video, like this is fantastic things that you can do for yourself to leverage yourself and stand out. Like Power BI, for example. Like this is something that we use so much in the business world that just doesn't get touched on at all in schools or in really any other industry. So if you go on YouTube and you watch like an hour and a half long Power BI video, this is a fantastic way to stand out for yourself here. Like something so little like that can really leverage yourself. And the different certificates that LinkedIn offers, like Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel, different things like this. Like do these things, like the Microsoft tickets, like they take like a couple hours to do, but we can see this on your profile and then it's just a +1 and it's so simple and it's free.
Nice. What about nuclear knowledge? Is that something you're generally scanning for, or is it just like a bonus or good to have?
I'd say it's, for me, a bonus because, again, just goes back to my comment that I'm not an engineer, right? So if I see like a can-do schematic, like I'll be able to understand it on a surface level, like, okay, that's a can-do schematic, that's great. But really when we dig into the more technical stuff and like I see these huge graphs and things I don't understand that I see on LinkedIn, I can say, wow, that's great, that's impressive, but I really don't know what it is at the end of the day. So I can see, other people commenting saying, oh, great, this is so technically awesome, this is proficient, this is creating efficiencies. I don't necessarily see that. What I will say, if I do see that in a candidate's profile, I make sure to send that to the hiring manager. So I say, hey, I might not necessarily understand this, but my manager works in reactor components, and I see a post about reactor components, I'm sending that to the hiring manager and say, I can't make any sense of this, but I know you can.
I think it all goes back to building your resume. That's probably one of the best documents. You can revision over time. I know I've revised my resume over hundreds of times.
Yeah, as you should. Yeah, as you should.
And so I've actually learned this the hard way, right?
For sure.
That actually the resume is not necessarily a list of all the technical details. It should have technical details from my perspective, but rather like what is the outcome, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, you're hitting the exact thing. So like I can dive into this so heavy, but I mean, like, when you're talking about resumes, I think the main thing is like just take the time to custom tailor your resume to the particular job posting you're looking at. Like so many times I'm looking at a resume and it's, I'm applying for this position and it's not in my company and it's not what I'm recruiting for. I'm like, okay, this is a blanket resume that you've probably applied to 50 jobs for. Like I can tell like immediately. All right. So, and it takes like 5 minutes because you can build up like a strong structure. You can build up a strong shell and then like adjust it as you're going and then be able to like really leverage yourself like that. So what I always tell people for resume development is there's kind of there's a reference document that you can use to develop your resume. That's the job description. So what I tell people is on the job description, any job description you ever see, you'll have bullet points on it. And what I tell people is to frame these bullet points as if they are questions. So the question is going to be on the job description, and then the answer will be on your resume. So tell me about a time where you've worked efficiently with a team. Frame that as a question, the answer will be on your resume. So I can say, okay, this person actually did the studying for this position, and we're able to align their resume with the actual job description. And within the points themselves and the actual bullet points in your resume, don't be afraid of detail. So in your bullet points, like so many times there's like 5-word bullet points, especially from the students. And I'm like, oh, I really need more detail than that. What each bullet point on your resume should say is what you did, why it mattered, and how you created efficiencies. So I can't think of an example off the top of my head right away, but built out Excel spreadsheets. This saved our leaders time so they don't have to search for information, which created efficiencies for our company to refocus the leaders' time on other things. Super rudimentary examples, but like give that to me in a bullet point. 2-3 sentences long, that's not a bad thing. Like don't be afraid of length in your bullet points there.
Incredible tips. I wish I can go back in the past and just rewatch this. Right?
You saw me. I just launched right into this speech there. I mean, this is something that I just talk to people about all the time, like on a weekly basis, even with the people that I touch base with and the students that I see. Like on Friday, I'm meeting with a student, and I might as well just send them a link to this because I'm just going to tell them the exact same things as really I'm saying here. Okay, so this is just great advice across the board.
Nice. Let's dive a bit deeper. So 1 page versus 2 page. What do you think?
2 pages is fine. I think people get too hung up on the 1 pager. Like, don't delete good things just because you want to make it 1 page. Like, 2 pages is fine.
All right, flashy versus not flashy. Like, do you want a simple PDF or a Word doc that just has text, or do you want some logos or a little bit of oomph to it?
Yeah, so for me, I'm like a very basic text person. Like, I just want to see the text. But again, like I'm recruiting a lot for engineers. And that's not to get confused with the portfolio. If you have an engineer portfolio you want to share, definitely include that in. Include your schematics, designs, all that stuff. But in terms of your actual resume, I just want to see the text. Now I have colleagues that recruit for graphic design roles, communication roles, e-learning development roles. Maybe you want to be a bit more creative with those resumes. But for me, recruiting engineers, I really just want to see the text, no problem.
Algorithms, let's talk a little bit about that. Like, the first thing that I hear when it comes to job portals and submitting resumes is like, hey, do you have the right key terms, or do you have the right, and this is before ChatGPT, by the way. Yeah. And so for me, very confused when I heard of these key terms or how resumes are processed in the back end. Right. What does the system look like?
This is really difficult to comment on because it's going to vary company to company, even position to position. I didn't really touch on it earlier, but when I was talking earlier about the strategy about hiring 100 people versus one person would be very different. So when you're hiring 100 people, you're definitely more likely to leverage the applicant tracking system and its algorithmic features to kind of identify strong candidates for you. But if you're recruiting, just for a couple different positions and hard to fill roles, think cloud security, things like this. You can just go resumes one by one. But in terms of what an actual ATS would look for, it would really be identified by the recruitment team itself.
Sorry, what's an ATS?
ATS is an applicant tracking system. So this is another great reason to have a recruiter on this. So ATS is just an HR term, just for an applicant tracking system. It's just, when you apply to a job, your resume goes into an applicant tracking system. And it's just kind of a one-stop shop for recruiters and managers to manage resumes and jobs and positions and the whole nine like that. Yeah, every company will have one of those. Really up to the discretion of the hiring team and what they want to search for. For instance, something that I've done in the past with particular positions is like Power BI. Like something as simple as that, going back to Power BI, watch an 1.5-hour YouTube video on it. You'll leverage yourself immensely. But again, like we have a really hard time finding that early talent that has experience with the Power BI. Because like when I talk to universities or when I talk to, early talent employer hubs, they're like, what's Power BI? And that just makes me say like, oh no, like we are missing the boat here so hard. So again, like we've had search queries just searching for Power BI of like thousands of resumes. Just give me the ones that say Power BI somewhere in the resume. So that's an example, but it really will vary kind of position by position and job to job. But again, that's just kind of one example of what that could.
Another aspect that I want to touch on is your background, right? So a lot of folks that watch my videos, they hear about, backgrounds in nuclear engineering. Yeah. What do you try to look for when it comes to mechanical engineers or software engineers or biomedical engineers, are they excluded, or is there a preference there, or do you try to diversify the backgrounds?
Well, you tell me, how many nuclear engineering programs are there in Canada?
There's one.
How many in the United States?
I don't know, like 4 or 5 maybe?
4 or 5. We got Purdue, we got MIT. There's probably some out west that I don't know about. So yeah, no, we need mechanical engineers. We need electrical, chemical, software, everything in between. What I would tell the engineers out there, if you're presented an opportunity and you're a chemical engineer and the role might not necessarily be chemical engineering related, try not to get turned off by that too much. I think this is maybe something that you can speak to a little bit more, but a lot of the early talent engineers, they say like, wow, I did chemical engineering, like I want to be a chemical process engineer so bad, but they're presented with an opportunity, maybe not necessarily related to chemical engineering, it's in the realm of nuclear engineering. Again, maybe not ideal for these people, but I think like, that just speaks to the nature of just nuclear engineering as a whole, in the sense that like if you're identified as a strong engineer, like strong early talent engineer, and you have an interest in the nuclear sector, like I think you really just have to kind of jump at it there. And then beyond that, mechanical, electrical, mechatronic, these are kind of the top 3 that we hire for outside of the demand of nuclear engineering. And we can never meet the demand of nuclear engineering across the board, just because, we rifled off Ontario Tech University is probably maybe the only university in Canada that can offer that actual degree there. So, we do look for other degrees like the mechanical, mechatronic, electrical would be the most in high demand. And the managers in the industry know this. So they know to say, hey, we're probably going to have to settle for a mechanical engineer for this role, and that's okay. And that's when I really rely on my managers to kind of tell me exactly what they need. Because I'll say it once, say it 100 times, I'm not an engineer. I just try to understand these concepts the best I can. So that's when I really lean on my managers to just provide me as much detail as they possibly can regarding the role. And what I really do is I just kind of play matchmaker beyond that, right? So I go to my manager and they say, hey, I'm in mechanical components. I really need someone with experience in mechanical components. They give me a bunch more detail. And then I kind of, hit the resumes and look for someone that matches that in terms of projects, design, anything that they have in their background that relates to that. So yeah, no, we do look for engineers outside of those nuclear engineers industry-wide, and we wouldn't be able to fill any positions in the industry if we didn't hire engineers outside of the nuclear realm.
My friends that were mechanical and electrical engineers, when I was in undergrad, they would have more, like a lot of interview opportunities as compared to folks in even my program with the background in nuclear engineering. And so people that think that there's a lot of folks that think that you have to have a background in nuclear engineering to work in the nuclear industry. No, not at all. Like there's electrical systems, there's chemical, there's a lot of mechanical components.
100%.
Yeah, so it's so diverse.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, not even touching on the software piece and the computer science side of the piece. I mean, that's a huge side of what we do in the nuclear industry. You would understand the side of the house better being and the engineers within the industry here. But the role of software and kind of automation and how it plays in the reactors and how they run.
Tell us a little bit about that, right? Like a lot of the young people, they're going more toward careers in computer science and software engineering, AI, machine learning. Tell us, like, how is the recruitment area changing in that?
Yeah, I mean, can I get a civil engineer somewhere? Like, that's really what I'm looking for, right? Like, there's just no civil engineers out there anymore. Like, this is just something that I've noticed overall. Like, everybody just wants to code and do the software engineering piece. Let's say I get 10 engineering resumes. I mean, 7 of them are going to be software engineers or computer engineers. It's just such a saturated market in all reality, and it's just hyper competitive, especially that software engineering piece. So, I think it's great that a lot of people want to do this, but I think maybe being able to diversify yourself in your engineering experience is great. And that's why I kind of led with like the civil engineering there, and the answer is joking around there saying like nobody wants to be a civil engineering anymore. I don't know why, but like the applicant pool for the civil engineers is so poor. But yeah, even just going back to the software, I mean, things like the mechatronic engineering piece, like this is something that, when I go to OTU, I really praise their staff about, is just the ability to take, the electronic piece, the mechanical piece, and a bit of that software piece, and just putting it all in a blender and just being able to be a versatile engineer, I think is just so important for us in our industry. Again, going back to the piece that there's not enough nuclear engineers to staff these jobs. So if you're, something like a mechatronic engineer, where you are versatile in your experience and what you're able to do, like this is hugely valuable. I don't want to turn off anybody from being a software engineer. It's just, from what I see in my perspective, it's a lot. Like literally 70% of all engineers, I feel like right now. Yeah.
Let's dive into that a bit deeper. Like,
Yeah.
say you're a software engineer, right? And I agree, it's a hyper competitive environment.
Yeah.
Software is a cool thing to do, right?
100%. Yeah. Everyone wants a code, right? Everyone wants a code. Yeah.
No one cares about concrete, right?
Yeah, no, that's not sexy, right? Yeah, designing buildings is not as fun as,
Tell us a little about if you're a software engineer, or a computer scientist, how do you shine? Like, what would you look? Is it the extracurriculars? What role do extracurriculars even play in this whole area?
I think the discussion on this side of the house for a long time was, build up your personal project portfolio, have things going on, build up your own little databases, build up your own little algorithms and things that you use in your personal life and your personal time and in whatever you do. And I think this is great, and it's a great foothold to get going. But the reality is every single person now has these personal project portfolios, and it's really hard on my end to kind of differentiate where this stands out. I mean, something huge that I see in all the software engineers is the GitHub. Again, really just building out a strong GitHub, because, I jump on that, and again, not an engineer, but I can tell, the GitHubs that are good from the not so great ones immediately, like within 5-10 seconds. So just the quality there. But I think like the main thing here just kind of calls back to the point that we were making earlier, and just being able to show people that you kind of get it, because software engineers, like, again, they just want to code. Like, they just want to code at the end of the day. But you, again, work for a business, you work for a firm, you work for a company. So I think just being really able to diversify. Yeah, I can code, I'm a strong coder, but I also kind of get the business side of the house, and I get where the bottom line is, and I get the kind of strategic direction of the organization that I'm applying for, that I'm working for, and really where we're going there. Outside of that, in the personal projects, I think like actual like work experience is really key. And this is actually something I see in like the software engineers that I think I see that lacks compared to like electrical and mechanical engineers, where just like that internship and co-op experience, there just isn't as much from those software engineering students especially. So when I send, 10 resumes to a hiring manager of software engineers, 8 of them will have an emphasis on personal projects and their own things, and 2 of them will actually have co-op experience, whether it just be working at like the city of Skugog for the summertime. The hiring managers will value that 4 months of the city of Skugog more than this crazy database that you've developed in your own time, kind of thing. So again, just like that actual work experience, like, cannot be understated across the board there. Again, your personal projects are great, your GitHub's great, but that actual work experience in a work environment, a traditional work environment, is just so valuable.
Well said. Well said. Like, I share with students all the time, the first internship's the most difficult.
Yeah.
Right? And then from then on, it's just kind of like boom, 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 from my experience, right? Like, for those that are looking for that first internship or that first job and they have no experience, what would you recommend to them? Like, what can they do to make themselves stand out?
So in terms of like securing that first internship there, yeah, so I mean, that's obviously the most difficult step there, is securing that first footholding. So I think just like really being able to just incorporate some of the things I've been even talking about so far today, building up that resume, like whatever you've done, like you can make it make sense. Like, for instance, for me, before I started working in a professional world, like as a recruiter, I sold TVs at a Best Buy. You know what I mean? And when during my interview as a recruiter, I was able to kind of leverage and frame my Best Buy experience in a way that would be applicable to my recruiting experience. So for those students that are seeking co-ops, you might not sell TVs at Best Buy, but you might be, you might have a project that you worked on at school in a team, and you ran into some problems there. There's always things that you've done, whether it be in your education or experience, that you can apply in your resume and in interviews, where it makes it seem like it's, very applicable and relevant experience. It's just like, how about you frame yourself and how you position yourself? Because again, like any experience, like, can be relevant experience. Because I mean, like, I'm pretty sure in Ontario, you still need to get volunteer hours to graduate high school, right? You have 40 hours of work experience there. Like, how are you going to position that in your resume, right? So just little things like that is really just like how you frame yourself and how you position yourself and how you position what experience you do have to make it seem like it's really spot on and relevant.
Absolutely, that's so key. That's so key, right? Like, leveraging that experience, like, just as an example, like for me, when I was trying to get my first internship, I just remember just bulk applying, just like
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And I had an interview with a company that sold valves,
Yeah.
right? Not like your mom and pop's valves, right,
Yeah.
in your basement, but
Serious manufacturer.
serious manufacturer for the nuclear industry.
Yeah.
And so I sat there not knowing anything about valves, but in my interview, I talked about how my experience as a nuclear engineer was relevant to where those valves were being used.
Exactly.
You know, I started talking about the primary heat transport system. And so my hiring manager, I made that connection, and like, he was so impressed. He was like,
oh, no, that does make sense.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And so I remember being the first nuclear engineer to get hired at a company that traditionally hires chemical engineers.
That's right.
And so yeah, it just brings me back to your point, like, you know, just leverage those experiences
Yeah.
and try to connect those dots, right?
Exactly. Like, how are you framing yourself and the experience that you do have to best align with the job that you're applying for? Because like there are things that you've done that make sense. Like again, I sold TVs at a Best Buy, and I ended up recruiting at a startup firm. And that might not make sense right away, but you know, in my interview, I made sure it made sense to the managers, right? And I got the job. So I think there's, you know, definitely connections that can be made for anything that you.
Let's dive into step 2 of recruitment, right? Interviews,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Those are pretty challenging. They take a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Don't just freestyle it.
Don't freestyle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about you know, you focus on that behavioral aspect, right? Like that business acumen. What are you looking for in these interviews?
Yeah. Sure. And I mean, that would really depend on the type of interview that is being conducted there. And I would say, you know, no matter what company or industry that you're interviewing for, having those conversations with the recruiter or the hiring manager ahead of time is always appropriate. Just say like, hey, what kind of style of interview is this? Are we doing a behavioral-based interview with some technical questions in it? Or are we just going to do like a technical question interview? Is there going to be a testing component? You know, asking about the structure of the recruitment process once you've been selected for an interview is totally appropriate, because like the company and the recruiter's already shown interest in you. So I think asking questions about in that kind of nature is totally appropriate and is definitely welcomed at that point. And then that gets into behavioral-based interviewing itself. So behavioral-based interviewing is something that's kind of taken, I guess, the entire industry, not only nuclear, just business world by storm in, you know, past decade or two. And really the idea of behavioral-based interviews is that you're predicting future behavior based on past behaviors. And it's really just as simple as that. So I think this is a great question to ask after I talked about costs, Best Buy, selling TVs at a Best Buy there. Because again, it's how you frame and how you've behaved in your past employers. You're able to kind of project how you will act. Because again, the best way to predict future behavior is just to look at past behavior, right? So again, if I'm talking about how I used to sell TVs at Best Buy and deliver great client experience, I can make connections to that, to the questions that are being asked. And then in terms of how these questions are actually scored, behavioral-based interview questions, you know, they're usually scored on a scale of like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, depending on the company. And then those behavioral-based questions, they'll all be weighted the same, generally speaking, you know, maybe 6, 7 questions, and then those will all be scored and weighted at the end. Interview scores are kind of a hot topic. You know, oh, this person scored a 48 out of 50, this person scored a 46 out of 50. These are marginally the same interview scores. And, you know, there's factors that go into an interview that may affect your ability to deliver a good interview. So if you deliver like a 46 versus a 48, like that's going to be relatively the same for us. Just some general interview tips for those behavioral-based interview questions. Ask the interview team as soon as you sit down, like how many questions are we going through? Because what you don't want to do is, you know, the first question, tell me a bit about yourself, and you like go on for 15 minutes, and then there's 30 minutes left in the interview to get through like 7 questions. So that's not great. So you can always ask the interview team ahead of time, like, hey, are there 8 questions in this interview? Like, and then you can think, okay, this interview is an hour, there's 8 questions, each question should be, not a math guy, however much time that is over an hour, right? So just being able to frame and budget your time correctly going into an interview. Always save like 5-10 questions, 5-10 minutes for your own questions at the end. I think like bringing your own questions is like a great thing. And like my hiring managers will note where it's like, oh, this person didn't bring any questions. Like it's kind of weird when they don't bring anything. I think like key questions to ask is, you know, tell me about the day-to-day of the job, tell me about the team, any key projects, high-level information that you can give us. Then like, you know, if you want to ask questions about the company itself and like kind of the key things that are going on at the company, I think that's great. Not every hiring manager is going to be able to speak on these massive projects and initiatives, but that'll show to the hiring team that at least like you've done some research into things that are going on in the industry and in the company as a whole. So again, just like bringing like really strong questions on your end, I think is like a great way to really deliver good results there.
One thing that I hear often for interview tips is like, hey, learn the vision and mission statement of the company, right? And kind of like weave that in. Yeah. Are these things a bit too cliche, or do you think it's best to come from more of a genuine perspective? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I would say like baking strategy, like mission vision statement into your answers in like a non-obvious way is obviously a good thing. Like you wouldn't want to just rehash the mission and vision statement like word for word to the hiring team. Like that's great that you've done your research, but at the end of the day, like that's not going to score you points. Like literally that won't score you any points. So I don't think that's like a very useful exercise. We're kind of going all over the place though, but I do think that the mission and vision statement is important, but I would put that more so on the application side of the house. So earlier I spoke about, developing a job, a resume that's reflective of the job summary. The mission and vision statement should be reflected in that kind of cover letter piece. So your cover letter should be, here's my experience, here's my education, here's my background, here's how it aligns with the business and how I'm going to help you to, deliver on your strategies and your overall goals. And then again, that resume should be reflective of the specific position. Cover letter should be reflective of the overall business and organization, which would be inclusive of that mission and vision statement. But going back to the interviews, I think that mission and vision statement isn't that important for the interview process. I mean, like if you're like a master and you can kind of bake it into your answers in a natural way, like I think that's really fantastic. But I think that would kind of be difficult, to be honest. Maybe if your company has like a huge focus on environmental, net carbon neutral by like 20 whatever for your particular organization, if you can kind of talk about how like net carbon neutral and environmental sustainability is important and key to you, I think that would be like a really good way to kind of match an answer to a mission and vision and not necessarily be so obvious about it.
How is recruiting different in the nuclear industry as compared to other industries?
Yeah. Just regulation, right? I mean, just the levels of red tape, just in terms of the industry side, but then the nuclear industry is also a heavily unionized industry. So you have both those things that are interacting at the same time. So you have to make sure from a recruitment perspective that you're aligning with the collective agreements of that particular employer. And then you also have to ensure that you're meeting the recruitment goals of the nuclear industry as a whole. Just like a really basic example would be dose. Like, hey, I need to check if you have experience in the nuclear industry, like how much dose you've taken. Because if you've taken like a ton of dose, like that's going to have to be a discussion with the hiring team and with my managers as to how that will be navigated and what that will look like in particular. So again, I think.
Or like security clearance.
Yeah, so security clearance is obviously a huge piece of the nuclear industry here, and thanks for calling that out. So I mean, security clearance, of course, we're working with protected materials and protected areas with assets that are really protected in nature. I can say protected 100 times, but it really is protected information in all ways. So again, the security clearance is a process that if you work in the industry, you pretty much have to go through. And depending on the nature of your role, you're going to have a different level of security clearance. Me being an office worker and you not being an office worker, you being an engineer, I would say, our security clearances might look a little different, just you and I. So just even, having a security clearance is a really big thing. And it can be a considerable asset as well. I think something that often gets mentioned is like, oh, I have a security clearance at, a large employer in Canada that has security clearances. And I'll say, great, put that on your resume. Because the security clearance process is a lengthy one. That does take a long time, no matter what employer you're pursuing in the industry. It takes a long time to go through it. So if you can identify that you have an active security clearance, I think that's a huge asset. Security clearances are good for 5 years. So if you've done once, you don't have to do it again for 5 years. So that's just a great asset to have. Even if you worked as a student for only a couple months, you have that security clearance, and that's just a considerable asset to have.
100%, right? That clearance is like, I feel like it's almost like a golden ticket, right? Yeah. Because from the hiring perspective, why would you not hire someone overnight rather than waiting 3 or 4 months with the risk of them not getting that job.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's so many people in the industry that can talk about, I have someone starting Monday, it's Friday, they're not security cleared. Like, oh my God, and they're pulling their hair out. So if you have that security clearance, like that's just such a huge asset for yourself there. And again, there's varying levels of security clearance depending on the nature of your role and what company you're with. And depending on the unionized environment, it might have more asset at some companies than not. But I'd say overall having a security clearance is a huge asset, especially if it's like a dire situation. I'm a company, I need somebody in the seat Monday who's security cleared. That's something that does happen.
Experience. Let's talk about international experience. Like the nuclear industry is growing mass scale. There's a lot of immigration to Canada. A lot of my viewership are actually from countries like India or many other countries where students are very interested in nuclear, right? So when it comes to having international experience or an undergraduate degree from a different country, how is that all evaluated?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of international experience, like definitely an asset. So I'll give you an example. So for instance, we have a lot of people that have international experience, international degrees, and they come to Canada and then they do a piece of education. And then, at that point, they start applying to jobs within the nuclear industry. So for instance, I think it's great when we have like an international person who's going through like a college program per se, and then they start applying to like our internship or co-op positions. A lot of managers in the nuclear industry, really do value that development piece for the students, for that young talent, for that early career professional. But at the end of the day, a lot of these managers just want kind of a body in the door and someone that can actually do this work and do this position right from day one there. So I think, a lot of our managers will target people, let's say you're doing like a quick project management course in Ontario, and let's say, something that we get a lot is applicants from Nigeria. Let's say you were in Lagos and you worked for like a project management firm for like 8 years. Like that is fantastic. Like a manager will jump at that in 2 seconds to hire them to work for their team. And then, that goes back to just like that pipeline, that what we were talking about. You get hired as a co-op student, you graduate, and you come back to us, you have that security clearance. And then you can just hit the ground running from there, from within the industry there. So again, I think having that international degree and education and experience is really valuable. But I really do think a lot of the reality is that we really want to tie that to something within Canada in particular, whether it be work experience here or education here. I think that would probably be the best way to do it at that point.
What about having an undergraduate degree from a different country and then maybe a master's from a Canadian institution? How is that looked at?
Yeah, for sure. So I think specifically what you're talking about is like an undergraduate elsewhere and then a master's degree. So absolutely that would be like a great career path, and I think a great kind of path to kind of follow through to get into the Canadian nuclear industry, because again, then that master's experience, I think will really like provide value and just really leverage you to kind of get in the door at any of these companies. With the master's piece, it gets difficult. Again, that's when we start talking about collective agreements and labor relations and things like this, because master's students might get bundled in one union, while undergraduate students might get bundled in another union. So the reality is, in terms of like student internships and co-op positions, for master's students, there isn't a whole lot. But for those master's students, like I would really kind of start to really hone in on those full-time positions after graduation. But again, when we're talking about the unions and the nuclear industry and labor relations, it gets more difficult when we start talking about master's degrees.
What if you have an undergrad but you have a certification like PMP? Is that also something that is a strong candidate, or like what's the right ratio when it comes to international education?
I think this is a really case-by-case situation, and I think there's accreditors and things like that in Ontario and in Canada that can kind of equivalate experience. Let's say, you have a university degree in electrical engineering from the University of Mumbai or something like this. I think there's systems and avenues in Ontario or in Canada where you can kind of equivalate this and get this kind of like, hey, this is a one-to-one degree and this is fine. And this is something I see a lot of the times in our applications, and they'll attach that document right at the bottom of their resume and say like, hey, this accreditation, this degree I do have, like, would be considered, a University of Toronto electrical engineering degree, the same accreditation kind of level there. Then of course, when we get into things like PMP, same idea applies. Like, I think PMPs, when we get like CPAs, like, these are international accreditations, right? So that's not just a Canada thing. A thing like a PMP would be recognized, I think, really kind of like anywhere in the world, as far as I know, much like a certified accountant would be recognized internationally.
I think that's really important, right? Like, for those that have the international experience, like, attach that to your resume, right? Get those credentials compared and evaluated, right? Because I know a lot of folks come into the industry. I got a lot of messages on LinkedIn saying that, hey, listen, I'm from so and so country and I have great experience, but I'm looking to get into the Canadian nuclear industry. And so I always encourage, and I think this is a great message for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that just goes back to just like send that double text kind of thing. It's just that kind of mentality where it's just, it's really difficult when you see like 20 declines, but that 21st, like, you scroll LinkedIn enough, you'll see these stories that people say, I tried to get into XYZ employer forever and I finally got that opportunity. So just, send that double text, send that double message, and just like be persistent in what you're doing, and try different things, switch it up in terms of getting visibility to hiring managers and recruiters.
Definitely. Great conversation. I learned so much, right? Like, the value of persistence, how to build a killer resume 101.
Yeah, absolutely.
The algorithm. What is that algorithm in the background? Yeah. So that's some key insights. Yeah. Security clearance, like, so many relevant topics, especially for young professionals in this day and age. Do you have a last message that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, honestly, like, I think this is just like, we're getting strapped on a rocket ship and we're taking off. Like, that's just the reality of the nuclear industry in Canada. We see things like small modular reactors getting pitched throughout Europe, getting pitched in the United States. I think in the past few months, we've had several key visitors come to different facilities in Ontario, politicians from the United States, politicians from Europe. Like, the world is watching what we're doing here in Canada. And I think like the new technology, the power generation, the power engineering, and the approach that we're taking, I think it's just really exciting. And like, I really want people to see like this is something that we should all be a part of and that we should all be really excited about, because I think Canada and Ontario have positioned themselves really strongly moving forward to be like a really key player on a global stage for what we're doing. And with that will come jobs. So again, that kind of ties back to what we do, and what we're doing is that there's going to be more and more jobs coming within this industry, and these key projects that we're working on, these projects get delivered, there's going to be opportunity around the world to deliver on similar projects with similar technology. So again, we're on a rocket ship, and we're headed right on up, and it's a great place to be, and it's a great industry to be in at this time.
Well, there you have it. Some really inspiring message right there to end off with. Taylor McDonald, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Osama. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.